this. Turn it on. All right. Check, check. All right. It's 11:15, so I'd rather get started. I know others will trickle in, but I want to make sure that you get what you came here for and get started, and then kind of backtrack as others join. Anybody who was in here before we set up the little post-it notes outside, what we would like you to think about as you enter, as kind of an introduction to us, is this question: how would you describe your approach in AI in at the most 3 words? We're just looking for one sort of adjective to collect a little bit what your thoughts are about your approach to AI. This is teaching related, so if you can, to the extent you can't, I would say and encourage you to think about what is your approach to AI in teaching in at most 3 words. One is fine, and we'll circle back to that. So let me introduce ourselves. You've got over there circulating Allison Thomas. I'm sure she has a fan base, so you probably know her from the Office of Academic Integrity. She solves it all, knows it all, I would say. I'm newish to all of this. I work and I'm here as a fellow, faculty associate of the Center for Faculty Excellence, and the Office of Academic Integrity and the Center for Faculty Excellence are actually co-sponsoring this event. So I'm here on one side and she is here on the other side, and our overlaps are that I'm working with academic integrity as it relates to teaching and teaching instructional design, but in particular as it overlaps with academic integrity. And so that's where both of our purviews overlap. She works with cases in academic integrity, but also educates the campus beyond and faculty about academic integrity as it relates to artificial intelligence. And I increasingly take on the role of advising faculty and helping with instructional design. And this workshop is sort of a kickoff of that purview. So this is completely new to me. As you know, the Center for Faculty Excellence is being built newly. So this is our kickoff as it pertains to AI. So thank you so much for joining us in this opportunity. We're also building out resources. So we will happily take additional post-it notes about what you think the resources are in terms of artificial intelligence that you need moving forward. To get us started. So what the objectives are of today's session is that we want you to gain exposure to your students' likely AI use. Maybe you're seeing it, maybe you're suspecting it, maybe you're sensing it. I'm here to give you a couple of data points so that you know what's going on behind the scenes. We want to secondly grow your familiarity with the Academic Integrity Code. And then thirdly, we want you to be able to develop strategies in response to alleged misuse. And as you saw, we put miss in parentheses because our students are using AI, and as they're using it, also veering on the misusing it, whether they know it or not, whether we know it or not. And so that's an important part that we want you to be able to develop. We will proceed in 3 parts. So I myself will give you a couple of data points about those kinds of AI uses and how students are likely using it. The second part, we will use a breakout table options here, and maybe you'll cluster a little bit, we'll see. And we'll give you 4 scenarios to work with and decide whether this is meant to be more a case of a reference to the Office of Academic Integrity Code, or whether it's more of a what we call teaching moment. And Allison will speak more to what that is and what that's defined as. And then lastly, we will have time set aside for a recap about solution strategies and considerations, kind of takeaways that you should take home. So first of all, just for your consideration, students are using AI, and increasingly so, and a lot. And I would say one of the most important observations, and Allison also spoke to that at another event, they use multiple tools. They don't just use one thing and then, kind of for one activity or one assignment. They go here and then they go there and they mix it in and they bring it over here. They use it in all these ways. But what you're seeing is that, of course, and these are four-year colleges data from a higher ed data set. Very recent survey, August 2025. Brainstorming ideas is right now at the top of what is being used for. It being used like a tutor, kind of an advanced Wikipedia in some ways, is also what it's being used for a lot. Students claim that they're not really using it to write entire papers for them. So the kind of use that we might consider, flagrant or obvious misuse is not something that they admit to. Fewer and fewer say that they're not using it at all. So, some data suggests that was what was maybe in the 25 every 4 students saying we're not using it at all last year. That's down below into the single digits. Many also who say they're not using it obviously don't sometimes know that they're actually using it via other means, like even just a Google search, unless you turn AI off, quickly turns into an AI search. So there is also some misunderstanding about what not using it actually means. I want to stress on the left-hand side additional data that was produced along with the one depicted about why they're doing it. And at the top is obviously the pressure to earn good grades. So AI is being used even though, and that question was asked in that way, it may veer on academic violations because of the pressure for good grades. Some say they don't care about the AIC, or maybe their institution doesn't. So this is not AI, not AU data, as you can imagine. This is broadly for across our higher ed system, 4-year degree programs. But then in the middle part, you also have things like struggle to understand content. So they turn to AI as maybe more so than office hours. If you've seen diminished attendance of office hours, AI is often filling that gap, unfortunately. In terms of actual assessment, so when do you use or what do you use? So the idea of asking AI to help me find ideas for my paper, ideas for topics, or ideas, in my case, I have an assignment where they have to devise and figure out solutions to a policy problem. They may go there first instead of saying, let me sit, what may be solutions to maternal health problems? Let me just go ask AI, what are policy solutions to maternal health mortality, for example? And so when we brainstorm ideas, they may turn to AI. And when we say AI, it could be any number of tools like Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, or other tools, or just the AI tool in Google to get them started in that thought process. So this is data, and very similar data as the previous one also exists for Europe. Well, what I liked about this particular depiction is when you ask them specifically about assessment. So, papers they have to write for an exam or a grade. The results shake out somewhat differently. They use it mainly to explain concepts. So if I ask them, in order to describe a policy problem, you have to use market and government failure terminology, which I taught over the course of my course. And they can't remember what I taught them. Instead of coming to office hours, they might say, oh, what is market failures? Or how can I, please my professor by including market failures in my paper? So to explain concepts and use it like a tutor. Summarize articles, they increasingly kind of, churn materials through AI tools to summarize those concepts and articles. What is important on the bottom left-hand additional observations, they often, and that data suggests it, that the Europeans collected also from 2025, and you'll see between green and blue how it's increased from the previous year. So they have panel data on most of this. is that they found most of this acceptable. So it's not, they don't necessarily question that type of use. And we're talking assessments now. So that is, that's what's going on behind the scenes in your classroom, very likely. Structure their thoughts, again, that goes back to this like ideas collection, etc. What I want you also to keep in mind is that often the way these are used for assessments will distinguish between types of students. So minority students, first-gen students, students who are first semester as opposed to last semester will use these tools differently, sometimes more like a crutch and sometimes more like an intermediate or thought partner. And I don't want to go into those details, but keep that in mind. Everybody isn't using it the same way and isn't using it as intensely. Last but not least, I want you to see this as something very recent I came across in my field, public policy. A team of researchers were asking students, how do you feel? So they have a pre and post kind of setup, asking students how they feel about AI. So what I just told you in the previous slides is relativized here by the fact that they're really concerned about it. Yes, they don't think it's abuse, they don't think it's misuse, but they're also really anxious about the use of AI, especially, and these are public policy government students, so maybe that's a little more pronounced in that realm, but they're not using it gleefully and happily. They're using it because they feel like they're pressed somehow towards AI, not because they're asked to, but because they want to maintain their high grades and answer all these questions that they're being asked and know all these concepts, etc. And they, through focus groups and surveys, the researcher came to conclude that students are concerned about practical skills. They want those. They have some sort of FOMO, fear of missing out about practical skills on the one hand. And they want and sense that they need the conceptual engagement. They have a shortage of that. They don't actually know what AI is, but they do want to and they know they need to. And then they have a lot of existential concerns around it. So they're using it, and here you see a term in red there, enshittification. So they're using it, but don't feel good about it. And that's one thing that is being expressed in that research that these public policy teachers are conducting at the University of Washington. So let me, with this, hand it over to Allison to turn this into more of a, what is this to do with academic integrity, and how do we get to thinking about teaching moments? At what point do we do that?
Thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? Thanks for the setup with this fancy little mic. I'm tempted to hold it like this, like I'm on an Instagram channel, but I'll refrain. I'm Allison, as Sonia mentioned, and mostly a lot of the things that Sonia mentioned about how students are using AI, I can confirm that in the areas that I'm trafficking in, which are like moments of challenge for faculty, moments of challenge for students, moments of challenge for staff who are supporting our students, all borne out. Like those things are all happening. The ways students are relying on these tools, the ways variations in how students feel and report feeling about these tools. And then of course, like all of us, this sort of, I need to learn about this, I need to manage this, I need to figure out where, if, how this belongs somewhere in my life as an educator. So I want to bring us into a kind of policy conversation in terms of that'll help us kind of focus on what can you do in situations where misuse potentially arises. This is usually one of the first kind of entrees into these conversations, and was, I think, from the beginning of the sort of mainstream availability of AI tools, right? What does this mean for education? Aren't my students all going to cheat? How do I verify my student has submitted work that's fully their own? What does this mean for the kind of educational contract or academic project that we're in? So I want everybody to know, this was true before AI came on the scene, that our academic integrity code exists. It is not the same as an academic integrity code in any other institution. There will be similarities. I'm not saying we're like a unicorn, but every institution has a different culture, different policies, different regulations, and different ways of articulating that, different degrees of specificity. Maybe you're thinking about your own undergraduate or graduate institution in comparison to ours. So I want to make sure that faculty and staff know what our code says. Our code basically says that there are two possible ways things could go if you see a concern, if you're feeling concerned about something a student has shared with you. You can submit it to the Office of Academic Integrity at american.edu, and we will move through a neutral process to assess whether the code has been violated. So that means faculty should not be assessing whether or not there's a code violation. Our office makes that assessment as a neutral party, and faculty should not be issuing penalties based on their perception or their assessment that the code's been violated. Our office does that. The second avenue is what's known in the code as faculty jurisdiction, and we've often used colloquially at AU since I've been here this language, teaching moment. So faculty members can respond to a concern they have without issuing a grade penalty. That's really the core. If you decide, I would like to teach to this, I see an opportunity to teach here, and I am comfortable not issuing a penalty based on what I'm seeing, then this can be an avenue for you. I want to emphasize throughout that you're not alone in this decision-making process. My office helps faculty, and these kinds of consultations I think are among the most meaningful work that we do, especially for faculty who are like, I don't know if anybody that well, or I don't really want to go to my chair, I don't really have anyone I could talk to, or I just want somebody new and to see kind of what their response might be. We help faculty through questions like this all the time without you having to commit to any course of action. So the code actually says this language: a faculty member may use the occasion to educate the student about acceptable standards for academic work. That's the language that's in the Academic Integrity Code. And I'll emphasize to educate, which is different from like to tell or to say or to direct. Those are different verbs, right? So I want to kind of give a quick sort of you can, you can't. I think what's unique about our code is that it reflects faculty decision-making about where teaching happens. Faculty get to make that decision, where the teaching should happen. Because teaching happens in my office. It's just a different kind of teaching. The subject is a little different, and the kinds of things we're zeroing in on are a little bit different. If the teaching is going to happen with the faculty member, it should involve some kind of like identifying of the problem as it associates with as it relates to the code. It should identify some skills, some concepts that require attention and practice. It should offer a kind of chance to do that practice in real life. And then it should potentially offer some additional resources. But offering resources alone is also not the same as teaching, right? You can't say to a student, you should just go to the writing center. Because then the teaching moment isn't between you and the student, right? It's good to refer students to the writing center. The writing center is great, but that alone isn't enough, right? You've got to engage with the student on the specific skills or concepts that you're gonna ask them to pay attention to and practice. And then you're gonna allow them to submit all or a portion of the work without penalty. The without penalty part is key. Penalties can look a whole lot of ways. I mean, the most obvious penalty is a grade penalty. So a faculty member can't say to a student, listen, I think you cheated on this test. I'm just going to give you an F on the test and we'll call it a day. You cannot do that. As a faculty member, you are subject to a grievance process if you do that. But other kinds of penalties exist as well. So if you were like, this took extra time now, so you're going to have a late penalty for the work. That's a penalty, can't do it. So if you're inclined to issue a late penalty for resubmitted work, you can't do that. You've got to come through my office, right? Anytime you're inclined towards penalizing a student, got to come through my office. So again, you can't issue a grade penalty based on perception that the code was violated. You can't base a decision for your teaching moment on identity. This is where issues of bias come into play, right? You remind me of myself when I was your age. You look like me. You sound like me. I like you. That's not a good decision for a teaching moment. That's not a good criteria for a teaching moment, right? The student admitted what they did and said they were really sorry. That may not be a good reason for a teaching moment. You can't knowingly avoid the issue, especially at the end of the semester. Things get really tight, I know. There's a lot going on. It feels like, I'm just going to let this go. Don't let it go. I think most faculty who've worked with my office know that we really try to help faculty not make this everything they're living and breathing for the time the case is happening. That is, we take the case and now it's ours, you go back to what you do. We may ask questions, we may ask for your help, especially depending on the subject that you're teaching. And remember that if you impose a penalty or you make an accusation to a student, you don't want to deny the kind of due process that the code offers to the students. Another thing about our code, it offers them due process. They get to respond. They get to participate in a process where they are heard. And like I said, they do learn things from our office, right? Like the university takes this really seriously. Like this will have professional consequences down the line. Those are some of the big things in our office. You also shouldn't share your conclusions with students or other colleagues. So if you're a faculty member and you're like, hey student, I'm submitting this to the Office of Academic Integrity because I have to, I think it'll be fine, you're probably just going to fail the assignment. Please don't say that. You're removed from the process for a reason. If an outcome happens and it's different than what you promised, now we all have a different kind of issue. Also with colleagues, this can get a little bit tense. I would, if you're inclined to share concerns or questions with colleagues, my advice would be like call us first, especially if you're in a really small program or you're in a program where potentially that information could be used inappropriately, not necessarily for purposefully, but if you're in a small program and that student ends up in your colleague's class, now your colleague is sort of like, oh yeah, that's the kid that cheated. We don't want that to be the reality for the student in that moment. So these are my tips for making teaching moments, learning moments. Sit down, I think probably what goes without saying here, but I'll say it anyway, like don't do this in an email alone. Sit down with the student, whether it's a Zoom call or an in-person meeting, and ask open-ended questions instead of using accusatory language. Be specific about the concern and how it's connected to the Academic Integrity Code. Be specific about what the student should do to learn and practice. Give them details. Give them clear expectations, deadlines, and potential consequences in writing. So when you meet with them, follow up with an email and say, here's what we talked about. We agreed that you're going to submit this method section to me in a week, and it's going to be more appropriately paraphrased from the source that you worked with based on the things that we practiced. If it doesn't come in on time or it comes in with the same issues, I will be required to submit it to our Office of Academic Integrity. There will be no grade penalty. There, I just wrote in a sample email, right? Don't assume that identifying the problem is enough. Offer examples, resources, and a one-on-one meeting to learn and practice. So if you've decided to have a teaching moment, you probably recognize something about the student's experience. That is, maybe it's reasonable that the student didn't know that this wasn't an okay thing to do, right? Or maybe they haven't had a lot of practice. I'll use paraphrasing because that's an example I've always come back to, like since I started working in academic integrity. There's a lot of different views on what effective paraphrasing is, even amongst faculty, right? And so students need a lot of practice on that particular skill. They may not know that they have paraphrased inappropriately. Many students, especially first-year students, come to college thinking, if I just take the language from the source and use a synonym generator to swap out a couple of words, bam, paraphrase. That's not what I think of as paraphrase. And here, Betsy, we're reminded that there's a lot of terminology that we're not on the same page about. What brainstorming is to you may not be what brainstorming is to me, and it may definitely not be what brainstorming is to our students. And so kind of think, and this is one of the challenges of where we are right now, we're kind of gonna have to do a little assessment about what our key terms are, which ones do we have to define, more of them than we think, the ones we may not expect, so that we're all on the same page. Yeah, go ahead.
So on this paraphrase, if I hadn't thought what is acceptable or unacceptable paraphrasing to my students, if I haven't taught acceptable or unacceptable paraphrasing to my students, can I still,
report them to your office if they have paraphrased incorrectly because they've done it in all these other courses and gotten away with it, so it's a mixed message or whatever.
Good. So if you called me and said that to me, I would probably ask, like, what level course are we talking about? And is this a first-year student? And is this a student who's taken a bunch of courses in this area, right? These are some of the things that actually are useful criteria if you're trying to determine if I've got a teaching moment on my hands, right? If you said to me, you know, it's like the third week of school and this is kind of a required intro class, I guess I could see how the student wouldn't have the tools. I'd say, okay, let's talk about what a teaching moment looks like. But if you said, no, this is an upper level course, the student is a junior, they're majoring in this topic, they've been through a number of classes, they took the required SIS research class, they took a writing class, then yeah, maybe this is a situation where it's reasonable to expect that the student has the experience to make a better choice. Do you feel like the tips have given you something to work with, that if we set you off on a bit of an activity, you might be able to kind of have some useful conversations here? I'll set this up and then you can tell me if you feel like you need more information about the tips. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
This is better saved for later. That's totally fine. Thank you. Can you talk at all about because I think one of the areas where I feel most confused about how to approach this is particularly in the age of generative AI, where it's like, I don't even know what, like, I hear that I, as a faculty member, am not supposed to try and figure out if they cheated, right? But I'm curious what that looks like from your office and how successful or able you feel like that process is to, if I bring something to you and I say, I think the student wrote this paper through ChatGPT, like, what is your office able to do with that?
That's a good question, a terrible question. So it is certainly true that our work on the teaching moment front has become more complicated. And that's also true for faculty, right? Because you might envision a time in the near past where you were like, this paragraph sounds shockingly like deep, sophisticated, like way more advanced knowledge than I would expect. I'm just going to throw a line or two in Google, or I'm going to submit it to turn it in. And then you're going to see a static thing, like here's a journal article that exists in the world, and I can compare it and say, that looks like plagiarism. Now I can sit down with a student and say, the words you used are the same as the words in this source. I'm not accusing you of anything, but that's an issue that's connected to plagiarism. Let's talk about what doing that more responsibly would look like, right? I just executed an old-timey teaching moment, right? But with AI, we don't have a ton of tools that allow us to say with confidence, you wrote this paper using ChatGPT. And that's part of why I'm saying, don't make that accusation. We don't have detection tools that are reliable for us to use. We don't have access to them on purpose because they are not reliable for our purposes. I would say this is why it's important to stick to the facts of what your observations are. This writing is really vague. This doesn't sound like you. This is really different than what I've seen from you earlier this semester. This is a level of sophistication I wouldn't expect to see from students. That's one you kind of want to be careful with because you don't want to seem like you're accusing a student of being like smarter than you expected. That sounds nasty, right? But saying the level of sophistication here is really different than what I've ever seen from students at this level. Those are reasonable things to say. That's presented in a spirit of open-mindedness, curiosity, question asking. It is also true that sometimes faculty go into these moments being like, I am going to elicit a confession whereby a student tells me they plugged my assignment into ChatGPT and I'm looking at the results. And like Sonia mentioned, most students are using more than one thing, more than one tool. So the idea that there's just like one step is not really realistic anymore. But also there's so much AI power behind a lot of tools that students may or may not know. And so a faculty member saying like, I think you used ChatGPT for this project, let's talk about it, I want to make it into a teaching moment. You may be confronted with a student who's like, I didn't use AI. And now you're stuck, right? And so the approach is more than ever question asking, curiosity, let's Tell me about your process. Share with me what your research looked like. What tools or resources do you use for help? Like, play this believing game, which is not really playing and it's not really a game, but like believe it for a minute when a student says, no, I didn't use AI, because they might have and they don't know it. And that's kind of what might fuel a teaching moment. Does that help?
Part of what I'm wondering is, so I can envision that more through the teaching moment path.
Yep.
I'm curious if the faculty member were to take the other path and say, I'm not interested in making this a teaching moment, and I promise I genuinely often would be, but if for whatever reason the faculty member says, I'm not interested in making this a teaching moment, I want to refer this to your office. My concern is that my student plugged this paper assignment into any number of generative AI sources and turned it in. Like, what would that investigation process look like from your office?
So it depends on what you come to us with. If it's, I'm pretty sure this student wrote this paper on AI, we need more than that. Your gut feeling is appreciated and taken seriously, but not enough to get a case started. It's a serious matter. It's very serious to students. And so we would ask some questions. What are the things that make you say that? Has the student submitted other work? What is the student like in class? So we're kind of like cobbling together a picture that we can say, okay, this doesn't sound like anything else the student wrote. This is way more sophisticated than what I'd expect at this level. The student hasn't been in class ever. Like there's a lot of factors. All those factors may contribute to us saying, okay, we're going to take this as a case. And we share that with the student. On this paper, these are the concerns that your professor had. We also often will check the sources. If you're having students submit something that includes a bibliography, we're going to look and see, like, does the source exist? Can we find it? Does the source connect to the in-text bits that are represented by the citations? Sometimes we'll ask a faculty member, depending on is this your, maybe you're assigning something in your field and you might be more familiar with the sources than we would. So we might ask for help on that front. Those are some of the strategies we would use.
Can I also just briefly say that what we're discussing are basically two pathways, and there's a third. So the pathway is, do you refer it to the Office of Academic Integrity to figure out with these pieces of evidence, or do you make it a teaching moment? The third path that we're not discussing here is to just basically grade something on merit. And that's where I come in, not in this particular workshop, but in other situations where I would then say, for future reference, let's see how we can design this assignment in a way that AI won't do, or in a way that plagiarism won't do. And so I feel like that part is also important to keep in mind, because there are things we can do as teachers to design our assignments in a way that just doesn't let it go by as, oh, I plugged this in and here's the output, and now I'm worried about, how to teach and how to bring it to the office's attention. So, but I want to bracket that out. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So my course is, I would say that my course involves some writing assignments and essays, because it's critical social thinking and I cannot really design quizzes or just multiple choice questions on that. So I think I would say my question is on two levels. The first point I want to kind of clarify with your office is at what stage do I, because the first slides that I saw was that it's not for the faculty to confront the student, quote unquote, and then penalize the student. But at what stage do I have a conversation with the student in a way that kind of alerts the student that they have plugged it into generative AI, and how should I start that? Because I find that for essays, typically it's kind of difficult. And also, even though they put in the effort, I do see that there are some points where they want to clarify the concepts. And then, so it's kind of a gray area. And following that, if I were to come to your office, what would be some, I would say, key indicators that I would have to satisfy before I come to your office? Because I can't be coming to your office with every paper where I see some traces and say, hey, this is what I think. Yeah. So what would be some of the indicators you would want us to satisfy before we actually come and report to your office? Thank you.
So sometimes I see faculty who are sort of like I have a case. I've spent the past 2 full days not sleeping, finding all of the evidence. Here you go. And that makes me sad because I've been that faculty member who's like, it's hard not to take it personally sometimes in situations where we're like, I am sure this is what's happening. And I'm offended because I spend a lot of my time on this class, but also I'm offended on behalf of the other students. I'm offended on behalf of the unit, right? And it's really hard to put that aside. And so I think that's really important to do. Sort of put your personal stake aside. What can you come to my office with? I mean, you can come to my office with, I think I have a paper that's been generated with AI. And the result might be us saying, I think you've got a teaching moment here. Or I don't know that we have enough evidence. Maybe grade the paper as is the only way, right? Maybe we can coach through a conversation that's useful, but maybe grading the paper as is the only way. It's really hard to substantiate. And so in terms of like making a decision about, is this a case, is this a teaching moment? Again, I'll emphasize, like, get in touch because we can always consult on those things. Always, always, always. But then the other thing is kind of what I said to Betsy, which is, given what I've given students already, and given what my expectations are from what they've had at AU, is it reasonable for me to expect that the student would have submitted work that's responsibly generated here? Like, is this okay? Is it reasonable that the student didn't know how to do this, didn't have the tools, didn't have the skills? Oh, I can see maybe the student needs more work on this, more work on that. Maybe the student didn't know that Grammarly has AI power, and maybe that's what's at work here. I want to talk this through and figure it out. And now I've had a teaching moment where the student learns, oh, Grammarly is powered by AI and does things that overwhelm my writing in a way that takes away from what I can learn from this class. And there's a teaching moment in there. So I would say first, like, call us if you want to talk through it. We don't then require you to do anything. You know what I mean? You can just have a conversation with us and we'll help you figure it out. But the sort of like, what are your expectations? What are reasonable expectations to have from a student in this situation is a question that I think is a useful one to keep in your pocket when you're looking at these things. Yeah.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
I guess the main thing is to sort of try to minimize these cases, these problems, rather than let it happen and then worry about that, basically. There are two things we can do. I mean, I'm a computer science faculty. I know a lot about this thing. I taught the artificial intelligence, and in fact, I use these tools, myself. But the point is that, for instance, I teach them at the beginning of the semester the world of artificial intelligence, all the different types of artificial intelligence that there are, the generative AI, agentic AI, responsible AI. Also, I show them that, what they can do, what they cannot do that, basically. So they know a lot about that. And then again, I'm just making sure that they understand that we are the CS people, we are building something, building based on the things, tools, whatever that are out there. Assignment is very important too. What kind of assignment we are assigning to them? Our assignment are generally are building, coding, whatever, that definitely the artificial intelligence cannot do that. I mean, I myself tested ChatGPT, all of them, everything. I know that their capability limitation, and therefore I make a decision what kind of projects I'll give them to the capstone student, that there is no way they could do that, basically.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Question, just Allison, to build on. So I've to answer the question, I suspected AI use. We can't prove it, but in the code, Article 2A4 is dishonesty in papers. Article 2A6 is fabrication of data. That's where we can usually catch misuse of AI. So what I did is I just checked a few sources, not all of them because that's Allison's office's job, but I saw that this source didn't exist. That source didn't say what the student said it did. I gave that information to Allison's office. She investigated, and I did not, and it's different than in the past. So, and Allison's office is terrific about separating out. There's an advocate for the students and another panel that evaluates the possible academic integrity code. So I just want to put in a plug for reporting AI use or improper use of sources or an academic integrity code violation. Because if we don't, if we keep giving the student teachable moments, we don't know how many times the student is having teachable moments
Thanks, Betsy.
with all these other faculty members.
That's an
And so
important
what message are we giving that student? And so I just want to put in a plug, and it is hard. I don't know if you're allowing this yet, Allison, but it does go out of our hands. But I want to make sure that there's a chance for me to have a closure moment with the student. And I've asked Allison when I report.
So this is actually a wonderful segue exactly into our breakout moment. So I appreciate, I know there's additional hands up and we have time set aside to then case-based look at exactly, what else to be considered. So I note
Sorry
that,
for
so
the
please
paper.
note your questions and then we will come back to an open discussion. These cases are exactly scenarios like Betsy noted.
Sorry to
it.
use
So-
paper. Good, make sure you're at a table with somebody that you can chat with. These are scenarios that are coming around. I will put them up on the screen, but first I'll describe kind of what we're hoping will happen here. These scenarios are ripped from the headlines, I would say, but not in any specific capacity, so I'm not revealing any personal data or information. If you would start by just kind of familiarizing yourself with what's on the paper, read through the scenario. There's the questions as well. Designate someone who can kind of tell us what you talked about, a note taker or a reporter of sorts, and think about how you would handle this scenario. Sonia's created a little decision matrix on the handout that I think is really helpful, and some questions that help you sort of think through. Specifically, I think it's important to get to what kind of language would you use if you decided this scenario is going to result in a teaching moment? What would that look like? What would you say? And so it may seem like really, really nuts and bolts to be like, I would say, you risk running afoul of the academic integrity, but this is language that I offer to faculty all the time, especially in that moment. There's a lot of gratitude for it. You can imagine if somebody's saying, the best way to say this might be something like, and so in some ways, selfishly, I'd like to crowdsource that a little bit. Like, what can you imagine yourself saying in the scenario, right? What elements would you focus on as a teacher? Like, what could you zero in on here that is to teach, that is the object of teaching? How would you start a conversation with the student? What language or phrases would be effective? And where is the potential for learning here? And I know many of you have probably had very specific experiences in this, maybe teaching moments of your own or cases of your own. And it's fine to draw from those, but I would encourage you, please don't use any student names or identifying information if you're talking about your own experience. And the scenarios are on the paper, and we'll kind of come together. We'll give you some time to talk through it with your group, and we'll come back together and sort of hear what you came up with from the activity. Any questions?
I would say let's give it 10 minutes. I will also distribute some pink papers here for language. So if you get to the point of spelling out language of how you would start a conversation with that student, we'd love it on that pink sheet of paper, notes in general. So this is 12 o'clock. Let's give it a go for 10 minutes, and then we have time to share out how you found, OAI or teaching moment. That's basically the question here, and then all those sub-questions. Why don't we gather? Of course, you can discuss these scenarios every which way and extensively. And to simply go, we have 4 scenarios. Start with the first. And what we'd like to hear from you, and I think there were 2 tables looking, can show of hands, who did the first scenario, scenario 1? Okay, so that's one table then. Like I would say, go in 3-part questions. How did you decide? What were the indicators that made you decide as you did? And did you come up with particular language to address it with the student? How did you decide? What made you decide? What were the indicators that you found in the case? And did you come up with any particular language?
We did not come up with any particular language. I don't think we decided. I think we were debating amongst ourselves. Some people felt it was a referable moment. Others felt it was a teachable moment because it reads like AI generated, just bland enough that you can't really tell. There's no hallucinatory source cited in there that tells you that they obviously did use AI or indicates. So we really didn't know. And so I think we kind of split. I don't know
What were
if
the
anyone else-
criteria?
What did you use to say, let's refer? What were the indicators that came up that made those who were in favor speak in favor of a referral here?
I think
So the fact that it was a first semester graduate student, just expecting a higher quality level of work. Also that it was an AI produced email. And there was also reference at the bottom that there was like an ethical AI policy acknowledging that their writing was like AI at like detailing their AI use, and the student didn't acknowledge that. And so the fact that they didn't talk about that at all made us think that there was like almost they didn't acknowledge it because there was knowledge of wrongdoing on their end.
There's some grounds.
Mm-hmm.
And what about the teaching moment? What were some of the criteria for that?
I'm the odd one out here. So I felt that there was not strong enough evidence. I think the AI email, and there's no rule that says we can't use AI to write emails. And I'm not agreeing that it's the best choice, but and then I think the feeling alone is not enough. Like it could simply be that the student submitted a poorly written assignment. I didn't find enough evidence.
What I was thinking to myself is that the email could actually be a hook to have a teaching moment in this case, because the email is so obviously not edited. Say, if that seems to be saying here, you can use that as a hook and say, see, that email tells you how wrong AI can get it. And sort of segue there, and what do you think that can do to your assignments? And then what do you think, somebody is working in the legal field here, what do you think that can do to your legal profession, your work as a legal, and having more of a discussion or conversation with the student about using that as a jumping off point to say, hey, how can things go wrong? And how might that be in your work and even in your professional context going wrong? Like that would be the language I would use, not verbatim, but I would use that as a hook to talk about the students' academic work and professional work, where that thing can go really wrong, legal field.
So I guess I'll say that all of these scenarios could go either way. Like I think you could make I won't say make a case. I think you could make an argument for either approach. Like we deliberately were thinking about like scenarios that you could say, oh, this will be a teaching moment if I saw this and I was sort of like, well, what's the teaching that's actually going to get targeted here? If the teaching is, I think you used AI, I don't know that that's enough, because it comes with a big assumption. You don't know if that's true or not. And I talk to faculty all the time who are like, I sat down with a student and I was like, I think you used AI for this paper. And the student's like, I didn't. And now you're in the meeting and now we're at an impasse, right? And so if you start with questions like, to me, this is the nugget that I'm zeroing in on.
Sorry, I had to advance it. Which one?
The student's very generic output that fails to meaningfully connect to the course materials. That's where the teaching nugget is. That's where you can zero in on the teaching, because it doesn't matter how it got that way. You can ask questions about like, how did you, a graduate student who's made a commitment to this work and is in this class and has a certain echelon of knowledge, create this? generic is outputted. Just because they might be using, like Anna said, writing emails with AI is not necessarily a prohibited thing. It doesn't mean, just because they're writing AI emails where you think they are, doesn't mean they're using AI here. This could be a conversation where you're like, you're producing some generic stuff. What's going on with that? Tell me your process. This is not at the level I would expect. Are you using tools? Are you using resources? Are you drawing from past knowledge? Did you not do the 100 reasons this could be the case, not necessarily AI. That said, if you submitted this to me as a case, I might ask you some questions, but this might be one I would take. Because you're saying, it's really generic, it's really strange, the student hasn't really been present for a lot of the class, right? It mixed up some fundamental facts. I'd probably want to do a little bit more research on that, like I'd want to investigate that a little bit, right? The assignment is clear.
Graduate student.
Yeah,
you know,
and
I
that it's a
think
graduate student makes it more serious. So like zeroing in on the teaching. Where's the teaching?
Scenario 2, what did you find? Same questions, you know, what were the indicators? Which tables? I think there were 2 working on scenario 2. Okay. What did you decide? What indicators did you use for that decision, and did you figure out any particular language?
So we are, I'm in suspicion, right? So this has come in my classes. This is not unusual. Students take all sorts of classes. So they may have taken another course and they have learned techniques which are different topics. It happens all the time. So of course not. I'm not going to accuse them. But if I'm curious, I will ask them, you know, I invite them and ask them, how did you learn this? Where did you learn it? If I'm curious. Many times I'm not curious because I can see that in 10 students. In my class of 30, 10 of them are doing this. This is how they do it, because they find it easier. So in that case, I wouldn't even discuss it. I would maybe discuss it with class. Say, hey, you guys could do this also. And those who can't, you can say that. That's what they do. But then what do you do? Because 10 students, nothing.
So that would be a case for grading on merit, basically, is what you're saying. That's that third scenario that we can lay the
So they get a
third
4 grade?
days.
They get a 4 grade? No, absolutely nothing. They would get what grade they deserve. So let's say I didn't do, let me bring an example. Let's say I'm teaching ANOVA and in an experimental design. And then somebody presents a solution with regression. And they're both correct. So I'm not going to penalize the students who wrote regression.
Yeah. That's baiting. That's
There's
baiting
no
on
way.
merit. So what would you decide there?
Oh, I we had the same came to the same
Yeah.
conclusion. I mean, it really depends on the field, but often, you know, in stats or in more mathematical fields, often you can use different techniques that are so common knowledge that it would feel weird to cite them. Now, since it said you should cite everything, I would then maybe just go back to the student and just ask them to add a reference. But in the end, yeah, there's not enough to go by to refer to academic officer academic integrity. It just could just be like they know something else just from some other source, and that's fine. In math, you don't have to cite completely standard things.
How would you decide, Allison?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that you said that I think are interesting to draw out. One is process versus product, right? If you are assessing, did the student get the right answer? I don't care how they got the answer. That's different than, did you do the problem according to the ways we talked about it in class? Sometimes in math, stats, or in the sciences, like the process really matters because I'm trying to teach, I'm trying to teach a strategy, an approach, a technique, right? And so maybe if I'm a student and I go to like Khan Academy and I see that they're doing it a different way, but I can get to the problem, I can get to the solution the same way, it may not matter. But if your goal is to teach the approach, then that student has submitted work that is like fraudulent in a way, right? Like if your goal is like, you must use the approach we have to, anybody from World Languages and Culture? This comes up with translation tools, right? Like, and some of the, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, some of the ways that faculty in these disciplinary, like language instruction, are saying things like, here's how to use a translation tool responsibly, but also like, I have speakers in my family whose first language is French, is Spanish, is Arabic. How can I get help from is getting the right answer the most important? Sometimes it is, but can you set up this construction? Can you work through this problem in the way we've designed it in class? So some folks, I think in WLC, are saying things like, you can't use vocabulary that we haven't talked about for this assignment because I want you to practice using the vocabulary that's in our pool right now. Both approaches are fine. It's really just a kind of like, what's the goal? What's the learning outcome? Is it process? Is it product? Did I mess that up? And assignment parameters.
That's kind of the lesson also that then can be learned. I wanted to hear from the other table as well, who did scenario 1. How did you decide?
2.
2.
we did
How did you
2.
decide? On what basis?
I mean, sort of similar to where we were going with this is like, if you asked to use citations and you did something else and you turned something in with no citations, then I feel like if as the instructor I set up the parameters and you didn't do that, I'm either not going to grade it or tell you to do it over or something,
May not rise to the level of an academic integrity.
Yeah.
So I think that's.
I think one of the things that I've learned over time is that, I speak to a lot of my colleagues who are like, well, I'm not an English teacher, so I'm not going to worry about citations and I'm not going to do that. But it's, I just feel like, that's incumbent upon us to set the standard of what it is that we want. So I try to make sure that I put that in my syllabus. And as much as I hate doing, this is worth 10 points, this is worth 5 points, this is worth whatever, right? I feel like that's the only way you're going to get across to the student why this is important.
You had your hand up.
For scenario 2, what I was going to say is, so in what we have in front of us, it doesn't say you had to use the product versus process. You had to use the process that you learned in class for the assignment. You could pretty much you could use something outside what was taught in class. You just had to cite it, and the issue is they didn't cite it, which is kind of how we came up with essentially teachable moment.
Yeah. The teaching there, the zeroing in might be on citation and referencing, which is a really new terrain when it comes to AI. There are citation styles that have approaches to citation, but more often than not, those aren't going to work in the traditional way that citations do. I've got a couple of documents about this on our academic integrity SharePoint, and I think we'll be doing more and more with the idea of disclosure here.
Let's hear from scenario 3. I think there were 2 tables. Who was doing scenario 3? 1? Okay, no, that's 1 table. What did you find based on what indicators and maybe with what language?
We didn't get to specific language, but I think we discussed both options, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we came down on the teaching moment side, given the context. So this is a first-year student. We were sort of divided as to whether or not it mattered that this course was in their major, but it seemed early on in the semester, perhaps there's a skill-building opportunity related to what it looks like to do research into cite sources, and also the methodology that the teacher used or the instructor used in this case to determine the authentic nature of their research is to pick one source at random and try to backtrack to it. So you only have one data point. So there might be another factor in favor of a teachable moment is that you don't have a lot to go on as of yet.
I will add an interesting point, which is we thought that more investigation needed to happen because of that only having one data point, and that we decided that would come down on both sides. And so I think we would treat, that the office, because that's what Allison's office does, is they investigate, but then it's out of our hands, and so maybe it's a teachable moment, so it needs more investigation. And then another point that was raised is if the student, if you talk to the student. So the first thing was, I think people were like, let's talk to the student. But then the question is where to from here. And if the student admits that they used AI intentionally, then there wasn't even agreement on whether you just ask them to do it again or what does that mean if the student used it intentionally? And then how do you determine if one student denies it for some cultural reason or an economic reason that consequences? And I'm seeing Allison's face, so I would love for you to respond.
I do want Allison to know that we have like 3 minutes
Oh,
left
geez.
in our.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I think I would prefer to hear from scenario 4 because I think we're nodding to your findings.
I'll
by
come
and
back
large,
to it.
right?
I'll come
I
back
mean,
to it.
We can always extend the discussion, but I do want
Yeah.
us to be able to finish at a time that we promised. At least the activities and all. So who did scenario 4? What did you find, and based on what indicators?
So there were 2 aspects to this. You have an undergraduate who was required to use in-text sources or in-class sources. They did not. And then there was a level of sophistication in the output, so definitely process and product distinction. We felt, there was a lot of, I think, debate about whether this merits elevation at a higher level. I think we ultimately came down to saying no, that we would have a teaching moment here. And some of us thought we would bring in the individual to have a conversation with them. Others thought that, it's very cut and dried. They didn't follow the assignment, so they just get docked for the assignment. One recommendation that was, I thought, really great was you dock them, they're going to be asking questions. At that point, they come in, then you can have a broader conversation about where else the assignment wasn't meeting expectations. But I think amongst us at this table, we also felt like these are problems we're dealing with all the time. And so having more tools to help manage this, more conversations like this is really, really useful. So thank you for hosting this workshop.
That's actually a great time for me to say. The assistant director in my office, Dina Oakes, and I are working on a voiceover, like a version of this that's not interactive, but that can be shared and you can look at. We do have some language examples that Stina is a person who will often be responding to faculty when they report concerns to us. And so we put together this list that we can offer them. I want to pick out 2 things to mention. One is if you're going to give a grade to a student, you should be able to justify that grade within reasonable language and criteria, and it should not include suspicion of inappropriate use of AI and thus an academic integrity violation. So you should be able to talk to the student about why they got the grade they got without saying, and you used AI. Again, that opens up a potential grievance. Eventually, it takes a longer route, but it comes back to me, and everybody's way, even less even more grumpy than this process can be, right? So make sure that that's going on. I want to speak to this a little bit, Betsy, especially in the logistical sense. If you are I'm ready to have a teaching moment with a student, you must sit down with the student in person, on Zoom, whatever. And if you're going to allow them to redo the work, decide beforehand, or don't commit in the moment, right? Ask your questions, get some information. Thanks so much for coming in. I'm going to think about this and I'm going to get back to you. If you need to do that, give yourself the space, because then you can call us and say, "Oh, this happened. It's totally different than what I expected." We get a lot of calls like that, right? But if you've got to I'm going to let you redo this work without any penalty, decide, is it all of the work? Is it a portion of the work? What portion of the work? And what do I need to happen to be able to grade it? Make sure that you can articulate that in writing. Do articulate that in writing. And think really critically about what it means for the student to redo, especially if you're redo all of the work. This is a 10 to 12 page paper. If you were give this back to me in a week without any academic integrity issues, we've talked about, I'll go back to paraphrasing. We've talked about what paraphrasing is. You've had a chance to practice it. Go fix all the paraphrasing issues in this 10 to 12 page paper. I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, that means I'm going to see another academic integrity issue from that student in another class, because it's a burden that's not on their calendar. It's a whole load of extra work, right? And especially if you're someone who's like scaffolded this 12-page assignment and it's like been built over time, right? It's really hard to recreate that, for the student to recreate that. Like, be realistic about what you can reasonably ask a student to redo. And for you as a faculty member, can you collect another round from this one student? And when you're thinking about bias, you've offered this student a teaching moment. If the same issue, you're like halfway through your stack of papers and you come across the same issue, you're gonna have to handle it the same or similar way, right? If you offer one student a teaching moment for an issue, and then you see the same issue in another student's work, now there's 2 more. Now there's 2 10 to 12 page papers that you're reassigning, regrading, giving feedback on. So like, being realistic about your work and your ability to kind of give the same opportunities equally to students, and the students' ability to kind of respond to what you're asking them to do. How feasible is it for a student to? Sometimes faculty think like, I'm being nice by offering a teaching moment, but it doesn't often, there's a whole lot of other factors that we may or may not be aware of.
So I want to acknowledge that we are at 12:30 but we are available. I certainly am. So all of those who had questions, please, as you like, stay and we can continue this discussion. But I want to, anybody who had foreseen other things happening at 12:30, please do not feel like you need to stay behind here.
If you want us to recycle any paper, leave it on the table. If you have your sticky note that you wrote something cool on, I'm sure it's all cool. Maybe stick it up on the window and then we can all, like, as we're leaving, parade by and look at how fun and smart we are.